Rain lashed the empty highway, turning the night into a blur of shadows and neon. The boy behind the counter of the dimly lit gas station glanced at the clock, 2:17 a.m. He wiped fog off the glass door with his sleeve, his breath leaving faint ghosts on the pane. The flickering streetlight outside barely cut through the storm, but he saw it, headlights swerving wildly on the bridge over the river, tires screeching against wet asphalt. The car careened through the guardrail like paper. For a heartbeat, he froze. Then instinct took over. He bolted out the door, the icy rain stinging his face, his sneakers slipping on the asphalt as he sprinted toward the bridge. The river below churned black, swallowing the car whole. Without thinking, he plunged off the bank, the cold water punching the air from his lungs. Submerged, he kicked toward the sinking vehicle. The driver's window glinted faintly in the murk. He grabbed a rock from the riverbed and swung, once, twice, the glass cracked. A final blow shattered it. Inside, a young woman hung limp in her seatbelt, her hair drifting like seaweed. He fumbled with the buckle, his numb fingers clawing until it released. Dragging her out, he fought the current, his muscles screaming as he breached the surface, gasping. On the bank, he laid her down, trembling as he pressed 2 fingers to her throat. A pulse. Weak, but there. He started CPR, counting under his breath, rainwater streaming down his face. 1, 2, 3. A cough. Water spilled from her lips. Her eyelids fluttered. Sirens wailed in the distance. Red and blue lights stained the rain. Paramedics swarmed the scene, bundling the girl onto a stretcher. A police officer gripped the boy's shoulder, shouting over the storm, "Son, what's your name?" He shook his head, backing away. His soaked clothes clung to him, heavy and cold. The officer reached out, but the boy turned and vanished into the dark, slipping between the trees like a ghost. At the hospital, the girl's parents clung to each other in the sterile hallway. "The doctor says she'll live," her mother whispered, tears mingling with relief. Her father, jaw tight, stared out the window at the storm. "Find him," he said to no one. "Whatever it takes." Miles away, the boy stumbled into his rusted trailer, peeling off his wet clothes. He knelt beside his mother's bed, listening to her labored breathing. She didn't stir. He pressed his forehead to the edge of the mattress, his own breath ragged. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle, the night holding its secrets close. The morning after the rescue, the boy woke to the sound of his mother's raspy cough. Sunlight filtered through the cracked window of their trailer, casting jagged shadows over the peeling walls. He sat up, his bones aching from the cold river and the sleepless night, and shuffled to the tiny kitchenette. A half-empty bottle of painkillers sat next to a stack of unpaid bills. He filled a glass with tap water, careful not to wake her, and set it by her bedside. She stirred, her face pale and drawn. "You're home late," she whispered, her voice frayed at the edges. "Extra shift," he lied, forcing a smile. The guilt gnawed at him, but he couldn't tell her about the river, the car, the girl. She had enough to carry. He worked 2 jobs, mornings stocking shelves at a grocery store, nights at the gas station, and every cent went to her treatments. The doctors said her illness was rare, aggressive. The medicine bought time, but not enough. Some nights, he'd sit on the trailer's broken steps, staring at the stars, wondering if the universe was punishing him for a sin he didn't remember committing. That afternoon, he walked to the community center, a squat brick building on the outskirts of town. He volunteered there 3 times a week, tutoring kids whose parents couldn't afford help. The director, a retired teacher with kind eyes, always left him a plate of sandwiches in the fridge. "You're too thin," she'd say, and he'd shrug, pocketing the food for his mother. The kids loved him. He never raised his voice, never made them feel small. A girl with braces once asked why he smelled like gasoline. "I work nights," he said, and she nodded solemnly, as if she understood the weight of the world. But that day, his mind kept drifting back to the river. The girl's lifeless body. The way her chest finally rose with a shuddering breath. He'd replayed it 100 times, wondering if he'd done enough. When he returned home that evening, his mother was slumped on the floor, one hand clutching her chest. Panic shot through him. He lifted her gently, his arms trembling, and laid her back on the bed. Her skin was clammy, her breathing shallow. The bottle of painkillers was empty. "I'm okay," she insisted, her eyes fluttering open. "Just tired." He didn't believe her. He never did. But the nearest hospital was 30 miles away, and the trailer's old truck hadn't run in months. He boiled water on the stove, soaked a rag, and pressed it to her forehead. "Rest," he said. "I'll get more medicine tomorrow." That night, at the gas station, the TV above the counter flickered with a news report. Mystery hero saves heiress in dramatic river rescue. His blood turned to ice. Security camera footage showed a grainy figure, his figure, darting out of the gas station, then diving into the water. The reporter announced a $50,000 reward for information about the rescuer. The girl's father, a silver-haired man in a tailored suit, stood stiffly at a press conference. "Whoever you are," he said, his voice raw, "you gave me back my daughter. Let me thank you." The boy's hand shook as he restocked the snack aisle. A customer lingered by the counter, squinting at the TV. "Looks like that kid's gonna be rich," the man chuckled. The boy said nothing. Money meant doctors. Medicine. A warm house for his mother. But stepping forward meant attention, questions, maybe even cops digging into their lives. What if they found out about the trailer's expired registration? The borrowed time on her prescriptions? He couldn't risk it. At dawn, he trudged home, the reward burning a hole in his thoughts. But as he reached the trailer park, he froze. A black sedan idled near their lot, its windows tinted. A man in a leather jacket leaned against the hood, smoking. The boy ducked behind a dumpster, heart pounding. Had they found him already? After 10 minutes, the sedan drove off, kicking up gravel. He crept inside, locked the door, and slid to the floor. His mother was asleep, her breathing uneven. He pulled the thin curtain aside, scanning the road. Nothing. But the TV news played on a loop in his head. $50,000. Enough to change everything. He opened the cupboard, staring at the lone can of soup left on the shelf. Outside, the wind howled through the trailer park, carrying the scent of rain. Somewhere, far away, the girl was alive because of him. But here, in this crumbling box of rust and regret, his mother was fading. He curled up on the floor beside her bed, listening to her breathe. "Hold on," he whispered, though he didn't know if he was talking to her or himself. 3 days passed. The boy avoided the gas station, calling in sick for the first time in years. He stayed close to his mother, rationing her remaining pills, crushing them into broth when she couldn't swallow. The black sedan didn't return, but the fear lingered, sharp as a blade. On the 4th morning, a knock rattled the trailer door. The boy froze, a spoon halfway to his mother's lips. The knock came again, harder, impatient. He set the bowl down and peered through the curtain. 2 men in suits stood outside, their shoes polished to a military shine. Behind them, the black sedan gleamed like a beetle in the sun. "Open up," one called. "We just want to talk." His mother stirred. "Who is it?" "Nobody," he whispered. "Stay here." He stepped outside, closing the door softly. The taller man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're a tough kid to find. No social media, no bank account, just this." He gestured at the trailer with a gloved hand. "But the gas station camera caught your face. Took some digging, though." The boy's throat tightened. "I don't want the reward." The man raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Hartley doesn't take no lightly. Get in the car." The drive was silent. They wound through the town, past the gas station and the bridge, until they reached a gated estate hidden in the hills. The house loomed, a modern fortress of glass and steel. Inside, a man in his late 50s stood by a floor-to-ceiling window, his reflection grim. "Leave us," he said, and the suits vanished. The boy stood awkwardly, dripping rainwater onto the marble floor. Mr. Hartley turned. His face was lined, his eyes haunted. "You saved my daughter," he said. "Name your price." The boy shook his head. "I don't need money." "Everyone needs money." "Not from you." Mr. Hartley studied him, then sighed. "Then what do you need?" The boy hesitated. "My mother, she's sick. The doctors here can't help her. She needs specialists. Medicine." A flicker of surprise crossed Mr. Hartley's face. "That's all?" "That's everything." 2 hours later, the boy sat in a private clinic, holding his mother's hand as a team of doctors ran tests. Mr. Hartley had pulled strings, his voice cold and commanding on the phone. "Spare no expense." That evening, the boy found himself in the Hartley mansion again, this time in a sunlit conservatory. The girl sat in a wheelchair, a blanket over her lap, staring at a koi pond. Her face was pale, her arms dotted with fading bruises. "They said you wouldn't tell anyone your name," she said, not looking at him. He shrugged. "Didn't matter." "It mattered to me." Her voice cracked. She turned, and he saw the tears first, then the anger. "Why did you run? Why won't you let anyone thank you?" He looked away. "Didn't do it for thanks." A long silence followed, broken only by the trickle of water. Finally, she spoke again. "I dream about the river. The cold. The dark. I didn't want to wake up." His chest ached. He'd heard that tone before, his mother's voice, late at night, when she thought he was asleep. "You're here now," he said quietly. "That's what counts." She wiped her face with a trembling hand. "Will you come back? They're teaching me to walk again. It's lonely." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. As he left, Mr. Hartley intercepted him in the hallway. "The doctors say your mother has a fighting chance," he said. "But I need to know, why refuse the money?" "Pride?" The boy met his gaze. "You don't pay for a life. You fight for it." Mr. Hartley's jaw twitched. For a moment, he looked like he might argue. Then he handed the boy a phone. "Keep this. Call me if you need anything." "Anything." The boy pocketed the phone, uneasy. As he walked to the bus stop, he glanced back at the mansion. A shadow moved behind an upstairs curtain, Mr. Hartley, talking urgently on another phone, his face tight with fear. That night, the boy's mother smiled for the first time in weeks. "The new medicine, it doesn't hurt as much," she said, squeezing his hand. He smiled back, but his mind raced. Why had Mr. Hartley looked so afraid? As he drifted to sleep on the trailer's frayed couch, the phone buzzed. An unknown number. A single text, "Don't trust him." The boy returned to the Hartley mansion the next day, the cryptic text burning in his mind. The girl was in the conservatory, practicing steps with a physical therapist. Her face lit up when she saw him, but he couldn't shake the unease gnawing at his gut. While she rested, he wandered the halls, pretending to study the art on the walls. His eyes lingered on vents, light fixtures, anything that seemed out of place. In the study, a faint blinking beneath the desk caught his attention, a tiny red light, nearly hidden. He knelt, heart pounding, and pried loose a small device with wires snaking into the wall. A wiretap. He confronted Mr. Hartley in the garage, the device clenched in his fist. The man paled, then slumped against a luxury car. "They've been watching me for months," he admitted, voice hollow. "Years ago, I cut corners, bribes, forged documents. When I tried to leave that life, they threatened my family." The girl wheeled in, her eyes wide. "Who's they?" "Men who think loyalty is bought with fear," Mr. Hartley said. "The car crash, it wasn't an accident. They wanted to send a message." The boy's jaw tightened. "Why not go to the police?" They own the police, Mr. Hartley spat, then softened. But I'm done hiding. Help me expose them, and I'll protect your mother. Whatever it takes. The trio huddled in the conservatory, drafting a plan. An informant, a former associate of Mr. Hartley's, had evidence stored on a USB drive. They'd meet at midnight in a derelict factory on the outskirts of town. I'll go, the boy insisted. They don't know my face. The girl gripped his arm. Be careful. Rain fell in sheets as the boy cycled to the factory, his hood pulled low. The informant, a gaunt man in a trench coat, emerged from shadows. Hartley's a fool if he thinks this ends here, he muttered, thrusting the USB into the boy's hand. A engine roared. Headlights blinded them. Two men leapt out, bats swinging. The informant bolted, but the boy dodged a blow, sprinting into the maze of rusted machinery. A bat grazed his ribs, he stumbled, pain searing, but clutched the drive. He vaulted a collapsed beam, losing them in the dark, and emerged bloodied but alive. Back at the trailer, he hid the USB under a floorboard, his hands trembling. His mother slept soundly, her breathing steady for the first time in years. He washed his face, staring into the cracked mirror. What's on the drive? The answer could save them, or get them killed. The boy's ribs throbbed as he limped into the community center the next morning, the USB drive burning a hole in his pocket. He'd barely slept, his mind racing with possibilities. The director glanced up from her desk, her smile fading when she saw his face. You look like you've been through a war, she said, pushing a plate of sandwiches toward him. He forced a shrug. Tripped on my bike. She didn't press, but her eyes lingered on his torn sleeve. Computer lab's empty if you need it, she offered, nodding down the hall. The lab was a cramped room with 3 dusty monitors. He slid the USB into the least creaky machine, holding his breath. Folders flooded the screen, bank records, encrypted emails, photos of the Hartley mansion with red circles around windows. One file labeled Accident showed the girl's car, its brake lines neatly severed. His stomach dropped. It was sabotage. Footsteps echoed outside. He yanked the USB free, heart hammering, as the director poked her head in. Everything all right? Fine, he said, slipping the drive into his pocket. Just homework. She frowned but left him to his lies. That afternoon, he met the girl at the mansion's conservatory. Her eyes narrowed at his bruises. What happened? He hesitated, then handed her the USB. Your dad's enemies didn't want this getting out. She plugged it into her laptop, her face paling with each scroll. They were going to kill me, she whispered. To punish him. Mr. Hartley stormed in, snatching the laptop. You shouldn't be involved in this. I'm already involved, she shot back, tears blazing. You lied. You said it was an accident. The boy stepped between them. We need the police. No, Mr. Hartley growled. They'll bury this, and us. The only way out is to disappear. Run? The girl laughed bitterly. Like you've been doing my whole life? A chime echoed from the boy's pocket, the burner phone Mr. Hartley had given him. An unknown number, they know where you live. Ice flooded his veins. He sprinted for the door, ignoring their shouts, and pedaled toward the trailer park. Smoke curled above the trees. His home was a skeleton of charred beams, EMTs hauling a stretcher into an ambulance. His mother's hand dangled limply from the sheets. No. He lunged forward, but strong arms held him back. She's alive, a paramedic said. Smoke inhalation. Stable. The boy slumped against the ambulance, trembling. A firefighter muttered to a cop, gas leak, maybe. Lucky we got here fast. But he knew better. Mr. Hartley pulled up in the sedan, face ashen. Get in. Now. The boy glared, fists clenched. You knew they'd come for her. I didn't. Liar. The word tore from him, raw and ragged. Who texted me? Who's warning us? Mr. Hartley's silence said everything. The girl arrived, breathless, clutching the USB. We're done hiding, she said. We take this to the news. Tonight. The boy stared at his mother's stretcher, then at the USB. Nodded. But as they drove to the TV station, headlights tailed them, two trucks, closing fast. The sedan swerved onto a narrow back road, tires screeching. Mr. Hartley gripped the wheel, knuckles white, as the trucks loomed in the rearview. Hold on, he barked, cutting sharply onto a dirt path that vanished into thick woods. Branches clawed at the windows, the car lurching over roots and rocks. The girl clutched the USB drive, her face steel. Faster. The boy twisted in his seat, watching the trucks fall behind, their bulk struggling on the uneven terrain. For a heartbeat, he thought they'd lost them, until a third vehicle, a sleek black SUV, roared out of the shadows ahead, blocking the path. Mr. Hartley slammed the brakes. Dust billowed. Men in masks poured out, guns raised. Give us the drive, one snarled, tapping the window with a pistol. The boy's mind raced. The USB was in his pocket. The girl's hand brushed his, silent, urgent. He slipped it to her. Get out, the gunman barked. Mr. Hartley hesitated, then killed the engine. Do as they say. The cold night air bit the boy's face as he stepped onto the dirt. The girl stayed in the car, her wheelchair hidden behind the door. Where is it? The gunman demanded. What? The boy said, buying time. A fist slammed into his ribs, the same bruised spot from the factory. He crumpled, gasping. Stop, the girl screamed, rolling into view. She held up the USB. Here. Just let him go. The gunman snatched it, grinning. Boss'll wanna thank you personally. But as he turned, the boy lunged, tackling him. The USB flew into the dirt. The girl scooped it up, wheeling toward the trees. Shots rang out. The boy ducked, scrambling after her. Mr. Hartley tackled another assailant, shouting, Run! The boy pushed the girl's wheelchair over roots and rocks, her breath sharp with pain. The factory, she urged. There's a phone, we can call for help. They reached the derelict building, its shattered windows gaping like eyes. Inside, the boy fumbled for the landline the informant had used. Dead. Boots crunched outside. Hide, he whispered, shoving her into a shadowed corner. He grabbed a rusted pipe, crouching behind a pillar. The gunman fanned out, flashlights cutting the dark. One paused inches from the girl's hiding spot. The boy swung the pipe, knocking him cold. Another fired, the bullet grazed the boy's shoulder. He staggered, warmth spreading down his arm. The girl screamed, hurling a brick at the shooter. It missed, but the distraction was enough. The boy charged, tackling the man. They crashed through rotted floorboards into a basement. Above, sirens wailed. Red and blue lights flooded the factory. Police! Drop your weapons! The boy lay winded on the concrete, the gunman unconscious beside him. The girl peered down through the hole. You okay? He sat up, wincing. Yeah. You? She held up the USB. Still got it. Upstairs, cops cuffed the assailants. Mr. Hartley stood in the doorway, face bloodied but defiant. A detective approached the boy. You're the kid from the river. Hartley's been singing your praises. Says you've got evidence? The boy handed over the USB. Everything's on here. The detective slotted it into a tablet, scrolling. His jaw tightened. We'll need statements. All of you. The girl wheeled to her father. You did the right thing, she said quietly. He didn't meet her eyes. Too late for that. As dawn broke, the boy sat on the factory steps, a paramedic stitching his shoulder. His mother was safe at the hospital, guarded by cops. The girl joined him, her blanket draped over his shoulders. You saved me again, she said. He stared at the fading stars. We're not done yet. A shout erupted. One of the cuffed men had broken free, grabbing a fallen gun. He aimed at Mr. Hartley. The boy moved without thinking, shoving the girl aside as the shot rang out. The bullet tore through the boy's side like a hot poker. He crumpled to the concrete, the world narrowing to the girl's scream and the metallic tang of blood in his mouth. Chaos erupted. Cops tackled the shooter, shouts ricocheting off the factory walls. The girl crawled to him, pressing her hands to the wound, her face streaked with tears. "Stay with me. Please." Mr. Hartley knelt beside them, his voice breaking. "This is my fault. All of it." The boy's vision blurred. He wanted to tell them it wasn't their fault, that he'd do it again, but the words dissolved into coughs. Sirens wailed closer. Paramedics shouldered through the crowd, strapping him to a stretcher. The last thing he saw was the girl gripping his hand, her lips moving in a silent prayer. He woke to the steady beep of machines, sunlight filtering through hospital blinds. His mother dozed in a chair beside him, her face peaceful for the first time in years. The girl sat at the foot of the bed, her wheelchair parked close. When she saw his eyes open, she let out a shaky laugh. "You're impossible to kill, you know that?" Mr. Hartley stood in the doorway, bandages peeking from his collar. "The police have the evidence," he said quietly. "I'm turning myself in. The bribes, the cover-ups, it's time I answered for it." The boy tried to sit up, pain flaring. "Your daughter needs you." "She needs the truth," Mr. Hartley said. "And so do you." News vans camped outside the hospital. The story exploded, front-page headlines, TV specials, hashtags. #River Hero. Strangers sent flowers, cards, donations. The boy shut it all out, focusing on recovery. His mother moved into a temporary apartment, paid for by a charity fund she refused to name. One evening, the girl visited alone. She wheeled to his bedside, her eyes red-rimmed. "They're dropping the charges against my dad. His testimony took down half the city's corrupt officials. But he'll still go to prison. Maybe for years." The boy nodded. Justice, he'd learned, was messy. "What about you?" She lifted a crumpled flyer, a law school brochure. "I'm going to fight. For people like you. Like us." He smiled faintly. "They won't know what hit them." A nurse brought discharge papers the next morning. Reporters swarmed the exit, but the boy slipped out a service elevator. The girl waited in a borrowed sedan, engine running. "Where to?" she asked. He glanced at his mother, who dozed in the back seat. "Home." But home was gone. The trailer park had been cleared, the scorched earth already sprouting weeds. The girl drove them to the apartment instead, a small, sunny unit with a view of the river. His mother wept when she saw it. "It's too much," she whispered. "It's a start," the boy said. That night, he stood on the balcony, watching the water glitter under the moon. The girl joined him, handing him a mug of tea. "You never told me your name," she said. He sipped the tea, bitter and sweet. "Does it matter?" "Yes." He looked at her, really looked. The bruises had faded. Her eyes were sharp, alive. "Maybe someday," he said. She didn't push. Some secrets, he realized, were worth keeping. Months blurred into a rhythm of quiet routines. The boy's mother regained strength, her cheeks filling out, her laughter returning in soft bursts. Mornings were spent at the community center, afternoons in the apartment studying for his GED. The scholarship letter arrived on a Tuesday, a full ride to a prestigious university, anonymous donor. He knew who'd sent it. Graduation day dawned bright, the high school auditorium packed with families clutching flowers. The boy sat stiffly in a borrowed suit, his mother beaming in the front row. When his name was called, the applause roared louder than he'd expected. Strangers nodded at him in the parking lot afterward. "That's the river hero," someone whispered. At home, a sleek black car idled by the curb, its chrome gleaming. Mr. Hartley leaned against the hood, his posture looser, his suit less sharp. Prison hadn't dulled his intensity, but his eyes were softer. The boy approached cautiously. "You're out early. Good behavior." A wry smile. "And a very persuasive daughter." The girl stepped out of the passenger seat, her cane clicking on the pavement. She'd traded the wheelchair for steady, deliberate steps. "Surprise," she said, nodding at the car. The boy frowned. "I don't need." "It's not a gift," Mr. Hartley cut in, tossing him the keys. "Think of it as a reminder." The boy turned the keys over in his palm. "Of what?" "That courage isn't just jumping into rivers," the girl said. "It's driving forward. Even when you're scared." Mr. Hartley cleared his throat. "The scholarship, her idea. She threatened to sue the admissions board if they said no." The girl smirked. "Law school starts next month. Gotta practice early." The boy's mother emerged, squinting at the car. "Is that ours?" "Yours," Mr. Hartley said. "Paid off. Insurance from the fire." She touched the hood, tears in her eyes. I've never even sat in a car like this." The boy opened the door for her, her hands trembling as she slid into the leather seat. He knelt beside her. "First stop, the clinic. Your checkup's tomorrow." She cupped his face. "My brave boy." Mr. Hartley lingered as the girl got into the car. "I'm mentoring kids now," he said abruptly. "Teens who got dealt bad hands. Teaching them to fight fair." The boy studied him. "Why?" "Because someone once told me you don't pay for a life. You fight for it." He stepped back, hands in pockets. "She's right, you know. The car's not for you. It's for them." He nodded at the boy's mother, then at the girl. "Keep driving them forward." As the engine purred to life, the girl rolled down her window. "Next time, you're teaching me to drive." The boy glanced in the rearview mirror, his mother humming, the sun glinting off the river in the distance. For the first time, the road ahead felt less like a battle and more like a beginning. The boy drove his mother to her final cancer screening in the luxury car, its engine humming softly. She'd insisted on wearing her best dress, a faded floral pattern she'd saved for special days. As they parked, she squeezed his hand. "Remember the trailer?" she said, laughing wetly. "I used to pray for a working stove. Now look at us." The doctor's words were crisp, final, remission. His mother wept into her hands, then hugged the startled physician. The boy stood in the hallway, dizzy with relief, the weight of years slipping off his shoulders. That afternoon, he drove to the river. Fall had painted the trees gold, the water calm under a pale blue sky. He walked to the bridge, the spot where it all began, and leaned against the repaired guardrail. The past year replayed in his mind, the plunge into darkness, the fire, the bloodied USB drive, the gunshot. But also the quiet moments, his mother's laughter over burnt toast, the girl's stubborn grin as she took her first unaided steps, the way strangers at the community center now nodded at him like he belonged. Footsteps echoed behind him. The girl joined his side, her cane tapping the concrete. She wore a law school hoodie, her hair tied in a messy bun. "They're naming this bridge after you, you know," she said. He grimaced. "They shouldn't." "Too late. City council voted yesterday." She smirked. "I may have written the proposal." He shook his head but smiled. Below them, the river sparkled, indifferent to its role in their lives. "What now?" she asked. He thought of the university acceptance letter on his desk, the textbooks he'd already ordered. "Keep swimming, I guess." She nudged him with her elbow. "You know, you never told me your name." "You never asked." "I'm asking now." He paused. For months, he'd been the river hero or that kid in headlines. But here, with the wind carrying away the past, it felt safe to be more. He told her. She repeated it slowly, as if testing its weight. "Suits you." They stood in silence, watching a leaf drift downstream. "Dad's mentoring a teen from the south side," she said. Kid wants to be a firefighter. Dad bought him gear, legally, this time. The boy chuckled. Never thought I'd say this, but he's a good man. He's trying. She hesitated. What about you? Ever think you'll stop saving people? He glanced at her. You first. A breeze swept between them, carrying the scent of pine and diesel from distant trucks. Somewhere, a child laughed, and the boy wondered if another kid was out there tonight, fighting their own current, unaware of how the world could turn. That evening, he parked outside the community center. Kids spilled out of the doors, backpacks slung low. A boy with a skateboard nodded at him, respect, not pity star. Inside, the director waved him over. New tutoring schedule's up. You're handling the older kids this year. His mother waited in the car, flipping through a travel brochure. Always wanted to see the ocean, she said, tracing a photo of a sunset. He started the engine. Next weekend? She blinked. Really? Really? As they pulled onto the highway, the girl's words echoed in his mind, keep swimming. He'd done that. They all had. The story spread, of course, blogs, YouTube videos, a Lifetime movie he refused to watch. But the boy didn't need headlines anymore. His proof was in his mother's steady hands, the girl's determined stride, the way the community center kids now dared to dream bigger. Years later, on a rainy spring day, the boy, now a man, stood at a podium in a university auditorium. His speech was short, unpolished. You don't choose the storms, he said, gripping the edges of the lectern. But you can choose to swim, or build a boat, or teach others how. The crowd rose in applause, but his eyes found only three faces, his mother, alive and radiant, the girl, now a lawyer with a steely gaze, and Mr. Hartley, clapping the loudest, his pride unashamed. Afterward, they ate cheap pizza in the parking lot, rain drumming the car roof. No one mentioned the river, the fire, or the night that bound them. They didn't need to. The storm had passed. End. Life lesson. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward despite it. One act of selflessness can ripple outward, turning strangers into family, survivors into guides, and broken moments into bridges. The greatest heroes aren't those who seek glory, but those who quietly choose to swim, even when the current tries to drag them under.